One of my favorite stories ever was when Colonel Corso, who had been involved with some of the technology transfer from studying the extraterrestrial craft from the 40s and 50s. And at one point, I think it was 1956, he was out at White Sands Missile Range where the first atomic bomb was detonated. And there have been all these ET craft zipping around. And at one point, he drove out because one came in on radar and went down out in a remote area of the range. And he drove out there in his Jeep, and there was a ET craft there. And it would be solid, and then it would dematerialize and look like a heat wave, like a mirage in the desert, and then rematerialize and dematerialize and rematerialize. Finally, it became stable, and an ET appeared outside of it. The technologies are amazing for teleporting and what have you. We'll get into that. I'm sorry. And so what happened is that the ET basically was saying, would you please stop targeting us? Because they were using the radar that had within it piggyback. This is what happened at Roswell, by the way, a early directional energy weapon that would hit these objects and they'd crash. I mean, there's this myth that somehow these ET objects go through interstellar space and interdimensional space and then can't navigate a thunderstorm in New Mexico. Well, this is ludicrous. They're targeted and have been ever since the 40s. And I know how they're doing it. I know what the technologies are. But in this case, the ET said, would you please stop doing it? And Colonel Corso, being a brash young Air Force guy, Colonel goes, what's in it for me? And the ET says, a new world, if you can take it. So I sort of feel like we're at this point in 2025 where we really have, it's a fork in the road. Do we want to take that new world, or do we want to stay on the path we're on now that is going to lead to more and more environmental destruction and worse? So I think that this is the point where we together, all of us, sitting in my living room, my little fireside chat, where there's no fire, but maybe someday we'll have a fire, and say, what are we going to do now? We need to enter into this new phase of human history, and now all the elements are in place to do it. It just needs to be a peaceful transition and transformation. And I will tell you, having spoken very recently with the NOC, who's coming forward, that is his aspiration, and he's doing this with all the good, best reasons.
How concerned should we be about media control and tech censorship?
It's funny, I think I offended a reporter with the New York Post last week, because everyone always pivots to, how could this be kept secret? I said, well, it's been kept secret because the legacy media and the big media and a lot of the big podcasts, I won't name any right now, they answer to their moneyed masters, right? So let's say that you're someone who's a reporter, and you come across this, and you're either threatened or you're bribed, and you're going to take what? You're going to risk your life, or you're going to risk your position in that news entity, or you're going to agree to be sort of an agent to either kill the story or what have you. So through intimidation and corruption, the mainstream media has never covered this. And I think the other part of it is that reporters, I've been dealing with the media, like I was on Larry King Live's special back in 1994, over 30 years ago. They want very simple narratives. They want very teleologic, straight line stories. And this one isn't. This is unbelievably complex, Byzantine, nuanced, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of research to unpack it. So it doesn't lend itself to the soundbite and sort of headline thing. It would take the best investigative reporting team in the world to unpack 1% of this, to be honest with you. And that has never happened. So, and when it has started to happen, they're threatened. Now, let me give you an example. People say, well, what do you mean? It's kind of abstract what I'm saying. Years ago in the 1990s, I was at a place in New York where there were a bunch of, very senior New York socialites and people there. And I think the wife of the UN Secretary General was at that meeting, and some other people. And there was a guy named Bob Schwartz, and Robert Schwartz, who was on the board of Time Life, had been on the board of Time Life Media Network, which became AOL Time Warner and all that. And he had been very good friends with Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes, CBS. And Mike Wallace was the premier investigative reporter, probably you could argue of all times. And he told me this. Now, Bob Schwartz was friends with Mike, and he said, the reason Mike Wallace became so depressed to the point of being suicidal was because he had found out about this UFO issue, had gotten some documents and information, and wanted to run with it at 60 Minutes. The people in the corporate C-suite, it's at CBS, which at that time was owned by Westinghouse, I believe, which was a big defense contractor, said, "Oh, no, you're not." And they forbade him from doing the study. And that's why some years later, he was on Larry King Live, a show I had been on, where he said, he became very depressed because he realized his whole career had been a fraud and that he was a fraud. And Larry King didn't understand that. And it was because he was a man of conscience, but was not allowed to tell the biggest story in the history of the human species. And that is a true story. Now, when Bob Schwartz told me that, the way he ended the conversation, I remember I'm there sort of doing what they call a salon, where a lot of, high level financial and social and political people gather, and someone comes into a dinner party at a home and shares what they know. And so it had to be short, but he said, let me tell you, the bottom line of this is the Fourth Estate, the media, have become scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. And the right hand of the king was this vast military industrial financial complex that Eisenhower warned about when he left office just before President Kennedy was sworn in. So he said, basically, on certain stories, there is no free press. And now this was a very senior media guy, and I'm very young. I mean, I'm in my 30s, I guess, or maybe I was not quite 40. And I'm there with this titan, corporate media, and he's explaining how this works. So now extrapolate that across the media spectrum. Even big podcasts that I know of, when they wanted to have the whole story of this on, they say, well, if you want to get this huge amount from this network to have your podcast sponsored, you can't tell this story. You can tell part of it. You can tell the disinformation part of it. And by the way, if it's in the mainstream media, it is almost always a little bit of truth and 9 parts fiction or disinformation. Now, what's the point of the disinformation? It's to gaslight the political leaders, as well as the public and the media, about what the actual truth is. So they always want people, they will open the door to you if you're willing to say the UFOs are a threat to the national security and we need more money for the military industrial complex. Now, I'm making this very simple. But if your narrative turns that direction, every door opens. Why? Because the powers that be that control the big financial entities and the vertically and horizontally integrated media, that's the story they want to hear, right? That's the approved narrative. Now, if you have a narrative counter to that, they don't want to hear it. What is that? The saying by the famous feminist Gloria Steinem, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. So, so I think that's another part of this, is that I always flash on Jack Nicholson, A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth. Everyone says they want to know the truth until they hear the truth, and then they go, I don't want to hear this anymore, right? So I think that's part of the problem. That's human nature. And I was warned in 1990 or 91 by a CIA operative who said, if you tell the truth about this, The truth is so bizarre. It's all true, but it will discredit itself. It'll discredit you and it'll discredit itself, because the truth is so outrageous of what's actually happened, what the technologies are, how we have hoaxed the alien threat through propaganda and psychological warfare operations, PSYOPs. And this guy knew all that. And I thought, at the time, I thought he had lost his mind. I said, what are you talking about? I'm a young, emergency doctor. I'm going, yeah, whatever, bro. But then I learned over the years, and it didn't take long, within 2 years, that the man, every word he said was true. So, that's kind of the way it happens. And it is sort of a future shock effect. This information coming out, it is a bit of a shock to the system, to the conventional people. I think we have to be compassionate with that too. And I've had to be very patient, whether it be with people in Congress or leaders around the world or military people, and give them the information that they're ready and able to digest and understand. Because, you can't go from 1 and 1 is 2, learning math, to quantitative analysis and calculus, advanced calculus. So it's a process, and that's why we need to start this. That's why I started all these documentary films, and thank all of you who've helped crowdfund them. We need to do another one, don't we, Michael? And we need to do one that really catches all this up now that this is coming forward and coming to a head. Well, I think we have to be very forward-looking, both in terms of the promise of this moment, but the risks. And the risks are the very powerful interests that don't want the full story out, that want us to take a aggressive, hostile stance towards non-human life and intelligence and what have you. They may not go quietly, right? And that is the risk here. The big risk is that they don't, and they're holding all the technological cards. Keep in mind, now let me, because I know we've been going on here for, I don't know, an hour and a half. But I want to share this story because it's circulated all over the internet. I found it hilarious. It's called the Wilson Memo. You remember that, Michael, when all that happened? Back in
oh, absolutely. It's been the subject of much obsession in the UFO community. So what really happened?
Yeah, well, because I was the guy that instigated that. And back in 1997, April, we had done some closed meetings for members of Congress off-site, not at the Congress, but at the Wesson in Georgetown. And there were a number of members of Congress there. And eventually what happened is when I was there, at that time, I was still living in North Carolina, working full-time as an emergency doctor and whatnot. I was asked to brief, when I was going to be up there anyway, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson, and is known as J2, head of intelligence Joint Staff. So prior to the brief meeting with him at the Pentagon, I had sent some information up through contacts, my POC, point of contact to him, that had some documents, a couple that had not been declassified, that because these programs are illegal, we have declared all those documents open source and all the whistleblower testimony open source. Just a little note here to whistleblowers listening. You're under no obligation from your non-disclosure agreements because you were signed it under an operation that was unconstitutional and illegal. Therefore, it has no force of law. That's the foundation of the Disclosure Project. Nobody quite understands this. The constitutional lawyers will, because that's how I came about this theory and ran it by some constitutional attorneys, both left and right, who said, yes, that's absolutely true. If the program itself is an illegal program, it can't then enforce national security law around it. So it's basically, they've outed themselves as an open source entity by going off the constitutional boundaries and operating illegally and lying to the president, lying to Congress. Anyway, So this gentleman had a keen interest in this issue. And so I gave Admiral Wilson in advance some materials. Through that and through him starting to know where to look. And this is what I've been doing with Senate Intelligence and Armed Services and other committees recently. He hit pay dirt. He contacted an office that was directly related to this. And when he called them, what I heard, what was relayed to me, is that he said, look, I'm Admiral Wilson. I'm head of J2, head of Intelligence Joint Staff. And they say, yes, sir, we know who you are. And he says, well, I want to be read into, which is military speak for briefed on this subject, UFOs and UAPs. And back then it was just called UFOs. And they said, sir, you don't have a need to know. And he said, God damn it, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They said, sir, we will not discuss this with you. And they hung up, blocked him. As he began to push further, he was threatened, and he was threatened with being demoted. Take a star off your lapel. So when you retire, it's a big pay cut. So he backed off of it. So by the time I get to his office, now remember, this is supposed to be a 45-minute stand-up briefing that I'm doing for the head of Intelligence Joint Staff. And it's hard to believe, it was almost 38 years ago in April, because it was April 97. And, he was, of course, nonplussed. I had with me, as a courtesy, I brought astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was very interested in this. And I had one of Eisenhower's young aides in the White House who knew about how Eisenhower was being denied access, Stephen Lubkin, who was an attorney. But as a young man, he was in the Army Signal Corps. And then my assistant and the man, the Navy guy who set up the meeting. And so that's who was there, but I was conducting it. And he kept canceling appointments because it went on and on past the time, because he was very keen on it. At the end of it, now this is what's sort of astonishing. Now here you have the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And at the end of it, I said, look, we need your help to get these programs that are being run illegally, because he had confirmed that at that point, under control. He says, well, Dr. Greer, what do I do? I have learned that there are aircraft that are human that can do circles. And that's what he did. He did like this, circles around our B-2 stealth bombers, which is the best thing I know about. So he said, it's point, set, match. It's checkmate. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to take on an entity like that. And he said, so I'm out. So that's how the meeting ended. That's a true story. Now, there's all kinds of mythology around all of this. But since I was the briefer, I can say this with some authority. I was the one there. But, I think you take that example, everyone listening, multiply that through the White House, the president, the Senate Intelligence Committee, now extrapolate it to the United Kingdom and the heads of state there, Canada, other countries that I've been to. That is the problem globally. It is not just the United States. So this sort of super secret, parallel secret government entity that Senator Inouye, from Hawaii, said back in during Iran-Contra, he said there exists a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's free from the law and above the law itself. I'm almost quoting word for word. You can go look at this video. And that is 100% true. And he subsequently confirmed to a young intern who's now helped us as an attorney that was especially true on the UFO issue. So, and that was during Iran-Contra. I mean, that was what, in the 80s or something, 40 years ago. So I think that this is the problem. And I ran into the same thing with this wonderful, very interesting man this was after I briefed Admiral Wilson, and he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the top military intelligence agency in the Pentagon that's over all other military intelligence operations. So it's the military version of the director of the CIA. So this is the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it was General Patrick Hughes, a 3-star general. And he asked the same thing as a couple years later, and he asked me to come in and brief him in a briefing in his conference room at the Pentagon. And he had the same thing happen. He had been denied access. He had been blown off, ridiculed. Now, what's ironic, I had whistleblowers in the DIA working under him who were read into compartments, but that never made its way up to the top. There were gatekeepers that would block it so that the old man, as they called him, wouldn't know. Now, people say, well, how can that happen? Well, it's because the people in those compartments stay in those compartments, and the people who, if you know about this issue and you're at that level of government, it's because they know that you will play ball with the secrecy. That's your sole criteria. Will you go along with this rather criminal and frightening level of secrecy or not? If the answer is yes, they'll let you come up. So there have been some CIA directors who've known about this, like George H.W. Bush and Bill Colby and Richard Helms. There are others who haven't. There have been some presidents who know a little bit, but had no control over it. Some who were told virtually nothing. There are some senators and members of the House who have been read in, others who haven't. The ones who have are the ones who are willing to go along with that agenda. And the ones who aren't, no matter how high your rank, doesn't matter how high, you can be the president of the United States, you're not going to be told the truth because they don't want you to know if you're not willing to go along with that agenda, the secret agenda. So that's just the truth. I'm telling you the full truth about how it works, the structure of that organization. Now, that dysfunction started in about 1957, 8, 9, late Eisenhower term. It has never been fixed. That's what we're in the process of repairing. It's fixing that big problem. Ironically, I was 3-4 years old when it happened. I was born in 1955, so I'll be 70 this year. And it's just one of these things where it's way dangerous, incredibly dangerous for something like that to remain operating out of control. And that is how you end up in the situation we're in now. So we're trying to find a path out. Lots of people of goodwill who are in these covert programs related to UFOs, UAPs, want that to happen. And I think with what's coming forward in the next, for all I know, it may have come out while I've been doing this. I'm using my phone, but it will be something that will open, I hope, a new chapter. So that's where we are.
On that note, to wrap up this first episode, what do you want us to keep in mind with these disclosures that are about to hit?
I think part of what's going to happen is that there will be a lot of people, both in the UFO subculture, let's call it, as well as in covert programs, that are going to take it and spin it. That's what's always happened. And they're going to try to spin it in directions that fit the narrative that they want to advance. One of my concerns, I'll be very blunt, is that as soon as this gentleman and his guys decided to unmask themselves, in other words, come forward named, which was not the original plan. The original plan was to hand over a lot of the evidence of these operations, the downing of the craft, the man-made ones to me, and I'd get it out. They decided to come out publicly. Well, as soon as that decision was made and they put it on a timeline, i.e. before the inauguration of the next president, which is where we are, all the drones stuff started. It was sort of a psyop. And, whether they're Chinese or whatever, the button to hit go on that was related to this organization wanting to create the specter of a threat. And then a number of other ridiculous things happened where, for example, the suicide bomber who blew up the Tesla truck at the Trump building on New Year's Day, he wrote a manifesto referring to gravitic propulsion systems, meaning anti-gravity, all the stuff this group is going to bring out. And so everyone thinks that guy was one of our guys. He's not. He had no relation. In fact, no one in my network even knew, had ever heard his name. But why did that happen? It appeared to be a psyop or something to create a tainted version of this. Now we haven't all the details on it yet. We're investigating it, but it's not everything that meets the eye on that weird event. Same thing with all these drones and this weird fog stuff. There are people all over the internet saying that's an alien invasion starting. Well, all that started literally right after, around the time my meeting with the NOC, and who said, I'm going to come out publicly now. I'm going to actually unmask myself, and I'm going to be coming out with name, rank, serial number. That's a game changer. And particularly someone at that level with other people and representing information from 6 different black sites. And I've only been over the 2, so I know of the others. But the point I'm making here is that there is a risk here. And the public, this is why I'm doing this podcast. So as whatever chicanery unfolds, here's where you need to listen. And I don't want to overstate my position. But if you want to know what's really going on, tune into this podcast, because I will not varnish the truth. It'll be the truth, the whole truth as I know it. It'll be direct. I am not a politician. I am not looking for a job. I am not looking for money, and I am not looking for a political position. I'm going to tell you the truth no matter what. So this is why people need to understand that's my mission. That's my purpose. And I'm wired into enough of this, as you can tell by now, that I'll be able to speak with authority. So, but there will be a cacophony, chorus, and chaotic attempts to do this. And then the other big risk is that what happened on New Year's Day with that Cybertruck explosion, or what's been happening with the drones, they could put that on steroids. They could launch that into even worse events, which we hope won't happen. But as an emergency doctor, here's the deal. You know, you have a multi-system trauma coming in, right? With 10 victims. You hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. You plan for absolutely the worst on all that. So my ethos here is to hope for the best, to be positive, but plan for the worst. And so I think that I'm going to be very vigilant to watch what's going on, what kind of spin is put on this by both the UFO subculture and the media, but what actions start to be taken by this corrupt organization, which is not yet under control. This is going to be, unfortunately, he may not know this yet, although I hope he does by now, that the incoming president's biggest task is going to be this. Much bigger than the Russia or China problem, by far, or the Mideast, by an orders of magnitude, couple of orders of magnitude. Now, that's not quite appreciated. I have met with some senior people in the incoming administration, and I'm not going to talk about those meetings. We've been doing it very intensively over the last couple months. But it's a process, but that process needs to quicken, step up the pace, because the law enforcement end of this that has not yet been stood up and funded properly needs to get stood up on day 1, which of course is Monday. But we'll see. I'm just hoping in the meanwhile that with enough of the information coming out, that it would become obvious to more and more people in the media and the public if some false flag operations continue. But I can tell you that the flurry of drone events and some of these other things that have happened are not a particularly good prognostic indicator, as we'd say in medicine, that organization is just going to go quietly. This is why I think that it would behoove the incoming president and Congress, as well as leaders elsewhere around the world, to come together and figure out a pathway out, including this amnesty concept, that people who need to come forward can do so safely without recriminations and liabilities. I will tell you that there's the former chairman of a Fortune 50 corporation who's reached out to me, but he's not only afraid of legal problems, but he's also afraid for the safety of his children and grandchildren. So physical safety. So there's a lot of mechanisms that need to be put in place that we've been advising literally since the Clinton administration. And I hope now that will come to fruition.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the next one right here on the Best of Dr. Stephen Greer.